Coming up on Bridge City News. Alberta reports a record number of COVID cases and can't keep up with the demand of contact tracing. Plus, U.S.-based Whole Foods tells its Canadian workers they can't wear poppies, then changes its mind following an Ottawa outrage. And 3 days later, our neighbors south of the border continue to await the outcome of the election.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The province of Alberta identified more than 1,400 COVID-19 cases in the past 2 days. According to Premier Jason Kenney, if these numbers continue to grow, it'll put our healthcare system at risk. Kenney points out that 40% of the cases in our province's two largest cities are due to house parties, gatherings, and socializing. Kenney is urging Albertans to be diligent again and to reduce the number of our cohorts.
And so effective immediately, Alberta is expanding the mandatory 15-person limit on social gatherings to include all communities that are on the watch list. This includes the majority of communities surrounding Edmonton and Calgary, and it means no large parties, no extended family gatherings, and no banquets or receptions with more than 15 people.
Kenney is also urging all communities on the watch list to limit cohorts to 3 people or less. This includes the City of Lethbridge, Lethbridge County, Brooks, Taber, Vulcan County, and the MD of Willow Creek. And with a record-breaking number of new COVID cases, Dr. Dina Hinshaw says it means new public health restrictions may be on the way. Alberta's previous one-day record of 622 cases reported last Friday was surpassed yesterday with over 800. Hinshaw says Alberta Health Services' ability to trace new cases is being outpaced by the rate of transmission. And with that said, effective today, AHS will temporarily change the current approach to close contact notification in our province. AHS will continue to directly notify close contacts of cases of COVID confirmed in 3 priority groups only: healthcare workers, parents of minors who have been exposed to this in the school setting, and people who live or work within congregate or communal facilities. AHS will no longer directly notify individual close contacts of positive cases that are confirmed outside of these 3 priority groups. This is due to Alberta seeing a record number of new COVID cases confirmed in the province daily, and with each case, there are double to triple the number of close contacts that require notification and follow-up. Remembrance Day is next week, and today there was widespread condemnation of the decision by grocery retailer Whole Foods to bar its Canadian employees from wearing poppies. The company that's owned by Amazon has 14 stores across the country. Whole Foods has said that its dress code wouldn't allow for any additions, but that it would observe a moment of silence on Remembrance Day and donate to the Royal Canadian Legion's Poppy campaign. The grocer has since changed its mind following an outcry by Canadian politicians, including Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, who himself is a veteran.
The poppy is not a cause, it's a sign of respect for those who sacrificed it all for our todays. That's why I was outraged to see Whole Foods is not allowing their employees to wear a poppy. They say it's part of a cause. Wow. The freedom they have to be that stupid was granted by the sacrifice of thousands of Canadians, and that's why we show respect with the poppy.
Veterans Affairs Minister Lawrence McCauley says he's now confirmed the policy reversal with the grocery chain's chief operating officer, and says that employees of Whole Foods will be allowed to wear poppies on their uniforms after all. Earlier today, the House of Commons unanimously adopted a motion calling on all Canadian employers to allow their staff to wear poppies during Veterans Week. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford also says his government will introduce legislation prohibiting employers from banning poppies during Remembrance Day. And closer to home, Bootsma Bakery in Lethbridge wants to do something to honor our veterans this Remembrance Day. Special poppy decorated goodies will be created with all proceeds going to support our veterans.
So for Remembrance Day, we thought it would be nice to make some Poppy shortbread cookies and some Poppy cupcakes. All proceeds from the cookies we're donating to the Army, Navy, and Air Force Veterans Club here in Lethbridge. We just thought it would be a nice way to support local and encourage people. They put their lives on the line, and there's so many people behind the scenes and who went overseas and who are currently in the armed forces that they give of their time to protect us as a country and to support us, so it's the least we can do.
The history of the poppy can be traced back to the Napoleonic Wars in the 19th century, over 110 years before being adopted in Canada. Donating a kidney for someone you know can be a hard decision, but one local woman went even further. She donated one of her kidneys to an anonymous recipient. As video journalist Micah Quinn explains, there were a number of inspirations which led to this specific kidney donation.
For Rhonda Dawes, donating a kidney anonymously just felt like the right choice. She received her perfect match in Alberta after her previous match in Nova Scotia fell through.
These were my options. I was ready to have it done, and they did suggest I could wait until next year when COVID's over, but who knows when that's going to be, right? So my way of thinking was 2020 has been such a crappy year for most everyone. By doing this in 2020 kind of makes my year the best year of my life.
Dawes originally withdrew from being an organ donor in 2017 after a family loss.
Shortly after I registered, my sister's husband passed away out of the blue. But the thought never left my mind. I kept thinking about it, and I was always wanting to do this, but it was more of I was concerned for how my family would feel about me doing this since we've had such a loss. So I had a good talk with my sister. So I'm getting emotional about it. It was really important for me that my sister was 100% on board because she already suffered the worst loss you could possibly have. So she was, 100% all in.
A big inspiration for Dawes to donate a kidney was Logan Boulet and Green Shirt Day.
So with Green Shirt Day, forgive me, I go out every year for sure. I go to every event that I can. I'm always there, and I just want people to sign that organ donor card.
Dawes says she doesn't want this donation to be called a selfless act, and she's crediting people involved in her life for making this happen. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thank you, Micah. As people are spending more time at home, many are using quarantine as a time to add four-legged friends to their family. The Lethbridge Humane Society says, however, that pets must first be a good fit for your family. Loris Alexander explains the SPCA wants to ensure that potential pet owners look at adoption as a serious commitment to a furry friend.
The process for adoption might be a bit extensive in comparison to pre-COVID, but Ella White says adoptions have been steady.
Our adoptions have been going pretty good. Cats were always full. It never changes. We have over 100 cats in our care between here and our couple of foster homes that deal with baby kittens and that. Cats is never ending. Dogs is reasonably steady. Our numbers don't vary a whole bunch. Usually when something gets adopted, that space is filled within a couple of days to a week.
The shelter has had to make some tough choices, including canceling a major fundraising event.
For the 4 Saturdays following Remembrance Day, we typically host a Paws and Claws pet photos with Santa event. Sadly, this year, due to COVID and restrictions and all that and how we would have to have it, we have sadly made the decision that that event has to be canceled this year.
With Christmas soon approaching, White has advice for anyone looking to adopt or buy a pet on impulse as a present.
Pets are not presents. They are a long-term commitment. Dogs, anywhere from possibly 10 to 15 years, sometimes longer. Cats, you should be expecting a 15 to 20-year commitment if you're getting a young cat. These are not impulse buys. It's not, oh, look, it's cute while it's small. When it gets bigger, I don't want to deal with this. You really have to think about what you're getting and make sure you're committed to that long term.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Thank you, Loris. Alberta's fiscal watchdog is sounding the alarm about $1.6 billion worth of accounting blunders by Premier Jason Kenney's government. The Auditor General says the errors apply to big-ticket files such as the Keystone XL oil pipeline and Energy War Room. Doug Wiley says the mistakes have been or are being corrected by the United Conservatives, but notes that the government should be following proper accounting principles so people have an accurate picture of what's going on. Opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley says the auditor's report is a harsh indictment of a government that claims to be fiscally responsible. South of the border, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has opened up narrow leads over U.S. President Donald Trump in both Georgia and Pennsylvania. That puts Biden in a stronger position to capture the 270 electoral college votes needed to take the White House. The Trump campaign insists the election isn't over and that it's confident the president will ultimately pull out a victory in Arizona, where votes are also still being counted. It's filing legal challenges in several states, but Trump would have to win multiple suits in multiple states in order to stop vote counts. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is urging Americans to remain calm as votes continue to be counted in the presidential election.
In America, the vote is sacred. It's how people of this nation express their will. And it is the will of the voters, no one, not anything else, that chooses the President of the United States of America. So, each ballot must be counted, and that's what we're going to see going through now, and that's how it should be.
As anxious Americans await a winner in the presidential election officials in many states are coming forward to defend the security and integrity of the vote counting process.
There are so many levels of security that go into every part of this election. You can't just walk in and get a ballot. You have to be registered, or in Wisconsin, you can then register when you're there, but you have to prove where you live. So there is a kind of a radical level of transparency at every level. People can watch any of the steps. We require voters to have a photo ID, and so they're identified when they come in, or even by absentee, you have to have a photo ID when you request an absentee ballot. We've had several recounts in the last few years, and they basically have stopped because after a couple of them, everyone realizes this is really accurate. Canvass occurs after polls are closed, a couple days later. We go over all the results to make sure there wasn't a mistake. 2
men will be charged with firearms offenses after being arrested near the convention center in Philadelphia, where election ballots are being counted. Police got a tip that people armed with weapons were on their way to the site in a Hummer truck. Investigators say the men who were arrested told police that the Hummer, spotted by officers near the center, was their vehicle. Police found an additional firearm inside the truck. Adam Davis is a former U.S. police officer and author of the book on spiritual combat. Davis says police deal with issues no average person should ever have to experience themselves.
Let me tell you something. Human beings were never created to see or experience the things that our men and women of law enforcement deal with day in and day out. The violence, the evil, the hate, they were not intended. They were not created to witness that, to see it, to deal with it. But through proper training and equipping ourselves with His Word, we're still human beings. We're still human beings. And we try to carry those things in our own strength and power.
Catch the full interview with former police officer Adam Davis, who will also discuss how prominent PTSD is with our first responders. That's coming up following the business news. Well, it's going to be a snowy, yucky weekend weather-wise, so why not go to the movies? Here's Len Binning with his Movie Mill Minute.
The 800, the top-grossing film in the world, is set in 1937 about a group of Chinese soldiers who defend a Shanghai warehouse just as Japanese forces are invading.
The Japanese are approaching from the north. It's beginning.
Saving Private Ryan. Tom Hanks leads a group of soldiers behind enemy lines to find Sergeant James Ryan, whose 3 brothers have been killed in action. We go back to 1995 with Pixar's Toy Story with the voice talents of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen as Woody and Buzz Lightyear.
Oh, impressive wingspan. Very good.
Oh, what? What? You can't fly.
Yes, I can.
Can't.
Can.
Can't.
The adventure takes off when toys come to life.
To infinity and beyond.
There's a winter storm watch in effect for much of southern Alberta this weekend. Beginning tonight, the first system will cause snow in the Pincher Creek and Cardston regions that will spread northeastwards Saturday morning. We'll take a closer look at that right after the break with the weather report. Stay with us. Welcome back. We do have a winter storm watch in effect for Lethbridge and surrounding areas of southern Alberta into this evening. We could see periods of rain changing to snow. We could see up to 2 centimeters of the white stuff overnight. Our overnight low also -1 into tomorrow, 3 degrees for Saturday, and 60% chance of flurries for our Saturday to start our weekend. Into Saturday night and Sunday, we are going to see snow and blowing snow. -8 the high for Sunday. Look at that overnight low. -11. Plug in the cars. -1 is the high for Monday, but we're going to see the sunshine again. Chance of snow again on Tuesday, so we could see those periods of snow coming back. 0 degrees is the high for Tuesday. -2 on Wednesday, and then we're going to climb up to 4 degrees for Wednesday under partly cloudy skies. So we can see that those temperatures are zipping all over the place, going from highs to lows. But according to the almanac, the average high for this time of year should be right here, 7 degrees, -5 the average low. 23 was our high temperature in 1949, and in 1945 we had our chilliest day on record, which was -23. Sun rose this morning at 7:29 a.m. and we'll have our sunset at 5:01 p.m. this evening, giving us around 9.5 hours of daylight. So days definitely getting shorter. As we look to the west coast, not a bad day for tomorrow. 9 degrees and 8 degrees on the coast there. Victoria and Vancouver, partly cloudy skies. Calgary could see 60% chance of snow tomorrow. Could be up to 5 centimeters of snow expected in Edmonton tomorrow with a high of -1. Now that winter storm watch is in effect also for Saskatoon, and Saskatoon could get 10 to 15 centimeters of snow by tomorrow. -3 the high. Mainly cloudy conditions in Regina, could see periods of rain, high of 5 degrees. As we look into central Canada, here's where the sun is, and it is lovely. 19 degrees the high for Toronto, Ottawa, 20 for Montreal. Us out here in the prairies, we are jealous of you guys over there in central Canada. And in Atlantic Canada, temperatures staying pretty steady, pretty even here as well. Fredericton's high, 17, mix of sun and cloud. Charlottetown's high, 12 degrees. A beautiful day in Halifax tomorrow, 16 under sunny skies. And St. John's, Newfoundland could see some drizzle and some fog tomorrow with a high of 10 degrees. So there you go. That is your forecast. An aviation expert from McGill University says Canadian Airlines are using a misleading and cynical strategy. Information from aviation data firm Cirium shows Air Canada and WestJet are continuing to schedule tens of thousands of flights each month, only to cancel the vast majority of them several weeks before departure. That leaves passengers stuck with vouchers they may never use or bookings on flights that take off days later than planned. John Graddick says the strategy marks a response to customers' pandemic-related last-minute buying habits. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says it's time for the federal government to stop cozying up to major airlines and force them to give refunds when they cancel tickets.
The government should behave as a government. That's what happened in Europe. That's what happened in the United States. The government said the companies, the airlines, had to refund. But since the Canadian government, and we seem to be the only ones in Canada to say that and repeat that, some others should, the Canadian government is behaving like a branch of Air Canada, doing everything by the detail of what Air Canada sees as fit and useful, and doing nothing to impose some discipline to this company who is acting against the best interests of Canadians.
The economy added a lower than expected 83,600 jobs last month as employment growth slowed dramatically. Stats Canada says the unemployment rate edged down to 8.9% from 9% in September, when the economy gained 378,000 jobs. Economists, on average, had estimated a gain of 100,000 jobs in October and an unemployment rate of 8.8%. And now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 15 points on the day to finish at 16,282. The Dow was down 66 points to 28,323. The S&P 500 was down 1 point to 3509, and the Nasdaq was up 4 points to 11,895. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.36 to $37.43 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to $2.89 US. Gold was up $1.68 to $19.5135 US an ounce, and silver was up 24 cents on the day to $25.61 US an ounce. Wheat is at $265 per metric ton. Barley's also at $265. Canola's at $5.45, and corn is at $272 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 30 cents to $108.65. Feeder cattle were up 53 cents to $135.93. And lean hogs were down $2.53 to $64.90. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $76.62 US.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Veterans Affairs Minister Lawrence MacAulay says employees of Whole Foods are going to be allowed to wear poppies on their uniforms after all. He says he's confirmed the policy reversal with the grocery chain's chief operating officer. The Amazon-owned retailer came under fire for its dress code, barring employees from any additions to the standard uniform, including poppies. Earlier today, the House of Commons unanimously adopted a motion calling on Canadian employers to allow their staff to wear poppies during Veterans Week. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a major issue for many police officers. Coming up, an interview with a first responder who talks about what led to his PTSD. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News Community Calendar. A fundraiser for the Lethbridge Food Bank is taking place Tuesday, November 10th at Honker's Pub and Eatery beginning at 7 p.m. Come and support a worthy cause and listen to great live music showcasing local bands. Honker's will have a featured meal and drink with a portion of the sales going to the Lethbridge Food Bank, along with a donation box and bin for non-perishable food items. A $10 cover charge will also be taken. COVID-19 measures will be observed with hand sanitizer and temperature checks. It's that time of year again. The Old Man River Potters Guild Christmas sale is taking place from November 12th to the 15th at number 2, 4416 First Avenue South. Find that unique gift for someone special. This sale features a wide assortment of pottery and ceramics. For details, visit oldmanriverpottersguild.com. The Juno Beach Centre is Canada's only museum in Normandy dedicated to honoring the contributions of 1.1 million men and women who served during World War II. This year, support a worthy cause and take part in the Remembrance Day races, being held until November 28th. You can register for one of 3 virtual race distances, each with its own special meaning. Participants will receive a race kit that includes a commemorative medal, a Juno Beach collector coin, a bracelet, and more. For details and to register, visit junobeach.org. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
We are living in unprecedented times of physical, emotional, and spiritual battles that can cause fear, anxiety, and even depression. These can take a terrible toll on our bodies, minds, and our souls. Many believe that in order to win these battles, we need to learn how to protect ourselves with biblical spiritual principles. Joining me now to talk about it is Adam Davis, a former police officer and author of the book called On Spiritual Combat. Welcome to Bridge City News, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me on today. What a great time to be alive.
Amen. It sure is. Tell me about this book on spiritual combat. What prompted you to write it?
You know, my co-author and I, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, this was really a project that was based on his book that sold over 500,000 copies on combat. So we wanted to take the psychological and physiological principles from that book and look at what the scripture says. What does God's word have to say about deadly force encounters? What does it say about combat? What does it say about preparing? So we wanted to provide some basic tools. Think of this like spiritual warfare training 101. Like you go to basic police academy or basic training for military. Your first day, your first 3 months is learning the essentials. So that's what we really wanted to do was provide some insight. And this was just based on some conversations we've had with first responders and military service members across the globe. And it's been very well received.
So, Adam, oftentimes we don't really prepare ourselves for a tragedy. How can we do so with not being overly consumed with fear and anxiety?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, fear, there's a study out, and I don't have the exact link to that right now, but I can get it to you. There's a study out that shows that our brains, the same trigger in our mind that responds to drug addiction and other forms of addiction, responds to fear the same way. So if we are understanding that hope, it can be more addictive than fear, that we have to be intentional about spending time in God's word, spending time in prayer, and having a lifestyle that is a lifestyle of worship, literally a lifestyle that honors him in everything we do. We understand that the enemies come to give, to kill, to steal, destroy. God sent his son Jesus. He sent his son to give us abundant life. So practical principles puts into place that his word is the answer we need. A relationship with Jesus is the answer we need. But if we take these principles and say, how does this relate psychologically? How does this relate with our actions and our contribution in society? Then that means that we take the principles of his word, we prepare ourselves through time in worship and studying the word and knowing how to respond to conflict and tragedy. Jesus told us, in this world, you will have trouble. It wasn't you may have trouble. He said, you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. He is the only answer. And when we have a relationship with him and his word abides in us and we in him, we become more than conquerors in a world run by the enemy.
Now, you worked as a police officer, Adam. Tell me about your experience dealing with people who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder.
There's a lot of people that deal with this, and a lot of times we limit that description to individuals who have served in some capacity, whether a first responder or military. But it also applies to individuals who have been sexually abused or traumatized or abused in some other form. And we often neglect those things. At the age of 5, I was sexually abused. I've talked about that openly. Didn't address it for 20 years, nearly 20 years before I addressed it, because I wanted to hold on to that pain. I was afraid of dealing with it. I didn't want to address it. And so you deal with the exposure that first responders, specifically in the case that I'm talking about, law enforcement officers, that they deal with day in and day out. Let me tell you something. Human beings were never created to see or experience the things that our men and women of law enforcement deal with day in and day out. The violence, the evil, the hate, they were not intended. They were not created to witness that, to see it, to deal with it. But through proper training and equipping ourselves with his word, we're still human beings. We're still human beings. And we try to carry those things in our own strength and power. So when we rely on the strength of God with the wisdom, the peace that only he can give us, then we can become more effective in our job. It's a dangerous, delicate situation. We shouldn't stereotype people if they have a designation or a diagnosis rather of post-traumatic stress. We should show them more care, and there should be systems in place where first responders are taken care of, not just for that incident, but for life. We should take care of them if they are serving our communities and it has an effect on them. And we have to do a better job of holding elected officials and appointed officials accountable and taking care of our public servants.
So with some of the struggles you've been through, I mean, you were assaulted, you said it at a very young age, also as a police officer, some of the things you must have witnessed. Did you struggle with PTSD yourself? Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, I woke up, I had night sweats, had nightmares, panic attacks, all the symptoms. Now, I never went to a doctor and received a diagnosis, but I can tell you all the symptoms were there. I could go through all the list of things. And how we respond to stress and traumatic experiences often looks like bad behavior or being reckless or things of that nature, because we're constantly chasing this chemical reaction that our bodies have when we're dealing with high stress situations. So for me, it was a case of uh, how do I respond to this? Because I get to the point to where deep down in here, I feel hopeless and completely useless because I feel broken. Warriors aren't supposed to feel this way. We're supposed to be invincible. And that's just not the case. We have to come to the understanding that we're human beings. And the reason Jesus came for us is because we're broken. And without him, we're nothing. And so when I began to see, I can't do this on my own, I can't carry this burden on my own, it become overwhelming and crushing. And it was just various experiences. I was never shot, I was never stabbed, I never took anybody's life, but it was just constantly seeing the evil around us, and some other incidents that I was a part of. I found myself not sleeping well. I found myself waking up with nightmares, covered, drenched in sweat, panicking and not responding well in different situations, and even shutting down and sort of zoning out when I was with my family.
How much did your family help you? Tell me about that.
Yeah. My wife was, she was an absolute divine appointment for me. She demonstrated the unconditional love of Christ, because she would sit and want to talk to me when I come home from my shift. I'm totally shut down. So understanding how to address these things from a spouse perspective, look at what signs to look for, look at what sort of red flags to look for, and then how to address them. And so that's very important that we do have those conversations, and that's probably something for a later date. But certainly, she helped me by not pushing me. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I know that you're limited on time, but towards the end of my career in law enforcement, she recognized these things. And so on a Friday, I got off duty, and I come home, and she said, "My mom is keeping the kids. We've got a lodge arranged for us in a place away, from about 6 hours away." And so we went to the mountains. We went horseback riding. We spent time away. She said, "I recognize that you were exhausted and you needed a break." So recognizing that and taking those steps and just listening to me and being there and being present. And sometimes we're hard to love when we're going through those things, and understanding that that's when we need you the most.
Horseback riding sounds like a lot of fun right now, especially up by the
It
mountains.
does.
Now, what's your message, Adam, to people who are struggling with the impact of tragedy in their lives?
Yeah. Let me tell you, my tragedy, your tragedy are different. They're all different. But let me tell you what isn't different. That's the pain we feel inside. That pain we feel is the same. It's deep and it's overwhelming, and sometimes it feels like you can't breathe. For me, I've been there. But there's a real peace found in a relationship with God through his son Jesus. There is a real peace available when we rely on the power of the Holy Spirit. Let me tell you, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead on the third day resides in you if you're a believer. And if you're not, all you have to do is call on him. Call on him wherever you're at, and he will respond. I can guarantee you, if you'll call on him, he'll respond. I dare you to try him. Relying on that peace, get into the word, find people around you that have walked through the season that you're in, the things that you've gone through, and connect with those people. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Find a local pastor, a local minister, different groups. One of the things I do is help a group called Reboot Recovery. We have small groups around the country. We're steadily deploying these groups around the country, and I think there's some in Canada, deploying these groups around the country, where we are removing the barrier of isolation, because that's so dangerous. So having that courage to take a step and say, I need help. And I have a lot of officers that reach out to me from all over the country and Canada, Germany. And it's important that we're willing to get over that initial, I don't want to talk to anybody about this, and so that we can move forward. And it's important to have that and understand the power of faith and resiliency.
Now, you mentioned reaching out to a pastor, Adam. No battles we face should ever be fought alone. No man or woman is an island. What should we know about choosing confidence and mentors that include our spouses or friends or pastors, like you mentioned earlier?
I think it's important to look at people who are around you who have been through something. Look at somebody and the resilient spirit that they've displayed. they've been through some stuff. And you find the people that have been through some stuff and that are willing to love you through your stuff. That's what Jesus does. That's what he did. He met the woman at the well. He wasn't afraid of engaging drama and changing the narrative in the middle of it. He wasn't afraid of addressing death and pain and changing the tone of that conversation. Jesus did that. And so when we want to look for somebody, we want to look for somebody that's compassionate, somebody that's qualified. And what qualifies them is their resiliency, that they've overcome this stuff and that they're willing to talk to you and be confidential about it and get you further help if you need it.
Now, you're right that prayer and fasting can actually make us stronger warriors. Tell me more about that.
Some things we can only overcome with prayer and fasting. And for the past several months, I have put out a national call across the United States. If you aren't living under a rock and you see some of the events that are occurring in America today, you know that this is a season for the body of Christ to come to life, to awake the sleeping, slumbering saints. And this should be a time of fasting and prayer for law enforcement. What it does is it removes us from our reliance upon our flesh and our own wisdom and knowledge. And it reminds us that our strength and our source comes from God himself. And it comes from a relationship with him. And when we take the time to rely on him and be intentional about trusting him and walking in what I call flashlight faith, his word said that his word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. I call it flashlight faith. I can't see the whole path, but I can see what's in front of me. And that's all he's called me to do, is take the very next step. And that's all he's calling you to do, is take the next step. Maybe it's the next step towards healing. Maybe it's the next step in equipping yourself and preparing yourself for spiritual warfare. And fasting and prayer is a great way to do that.
Now, training is also very important with anything, for a new job or if you're an athlete preparing for a major sporting event. Adam, you say training should include prayer drills. What are some of the elements of prayer drills?
Oh my goodness! You think about, you go through the Psalms. You look at some of the Psalms that you have, and David had some great prayers. So you think about how we go through firing drills, or we go through shooting drills, and all of these prayer drills that we talk about are listed in the book, and they're great resources. I'm not going to give them away, but I want to tip you out here. When you're a first responder, law enforcement officer, whether you're in the military, and you're learning to shoot with a firearm, or you're learning to operate different weapons, there's different drills you go through. You want to spend the time becoming familiar. You don't have to have complex, complicated, big words. You want to spend the time to become familiar, and that it's part of everything you do. Just like when you breathe, there's tactical breathing to help you deal with panic attacks or anxiety or high stress. You want that to become part of who you are, part of your everyday life that you have. That it doesn't matter what happens. That's your first step.
Now, sometimes we face multiple threats all at the same time. What's important to remember during those moments?
Focus on the one who gives us victory. I'll tell you this. I had a dream recently that I was hiding behind a really big rock, and it was a giant red rock. And I was hiding behind this rock, and there were rounds being shot down where I was at from somebody down the road or down the range. And there were one round after another. And I remember hearing, "Be still." And "be still" to me meant I wasn't qualified. Initially, it meant I wasn't qualified to address the threat. But what it was God saying, "Be still, because I'm going to go take care of the threat down here, so that when you move in your next mission of battle, you're moving forward in victory." So sometimes we have to understand that it's small, subtle changes, small, subtle adjustments. Like if you're adjusting the scope on a firearm, it's not drastic changes. It's small, subtle changes that mean the difference between a hit on target or completely missing your target. So understanding, like in that case, it wasn't that I wasn't qualified or wasn't ready. He was literally protecting my journey so that I can move forward in victory. Listen when you pray. Listen to what his word says. He still speaks. His word is alive and well today. I wrote a book in 2017. It released in 2018. It's called Behind the Badge. It's a daily devotion for law enforcement. It's a bestseller in Canada and the United States. I wrote it 3 years ago. If you go and read some of the entries that are today, you would have thought that I had some kind of knowledge for what's going on today. That tells us his word is alive and well, and it speaks life. Wherever you are, no matter what you're going through, go to that word and spend time in it daily.
Adam Davis, former police officer and author of the book On Spiritual Combat, thanks for joining me today from Alabama.
Hey, thank you so much, Hal, for having me.
Many today seem to be embracing what's called the woke movement with its race and gender theories and its focus on victims, and it's playing a major role in the upcoming U.S. election. Social justice is a big focus as well, but how well does the woke movement line up with biblical principles? Today's guest is Dr. Kel Beisner, the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and author of the booklet entitled Social Justice versus Biblical Justice, How Good Intentions Undermine Justice and Gospel. All right, so he joins me now via Skype from Memphis, Tennessee. Kel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. It's great to be back with you on the show.
So, Kel, let's start with this. I'm sure some people have heard of the woke movement, but possibly many have not. What exactly is the woke movement? What does that mean?
That's that's a really great question, because I think the woke movement is extremely broad, and it's not really precisely defined. What we might say is that it's sort of the younger generation's continuation of the progressive movement, which has roots clear back into the late 19th century. And what I see in the woke movement is, first of all, a wonderful, compassion, a real desire to look at people who are suffering in various different ways, whether it's poverty or disease or prejudice or anything else. And so many young people in the woke movement look at these suffering people and they just respond immediately with a heartfelt desire to be able to help these people. And man, if that's the root of it, it's something to applaud. And I don't just start off with a knee-jerk reaction to it. I very much appreciate that. At the same time, one of my favorite economists, a man named Walter Williams, wrote in his book, The State Against Blacks, in which he examined the actual consequences, not just the intentions, but the actual consequences of lots of American federal government policy intended to help African Americans through the 1960s, 70s, into the 1980s. He wrote the book in the early 80s. What he found was that, without exception, every one of those policies, regardless of the good intents, actually harmed African Americans more than it helped them. And so at one point in the book, he said, truly compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. I think that's brilliant. And it's what I would love to see grow more and more in the woke movement, a wedding together of compassionate motivation with dispassionate analysis of actual consequences of policy. One of the things that I'm concerned about in the woke movement is that many times folks will think, well, these people are suffering, and I want to see that suffering relieved, and doing that is a matter of justice. Well, sometimes it is a matter of justice, but sometimes instead it's a matter of something quite different. It's a matter of something that we call charity or grace. Our very word charity comes from the Greek word charis, the word for grace in the New Testament. And if we confuse justice and grace, we can wind up with policies that actually harm where we mean to do well. And we can also then really confuse the Christian faith, and what is central to it is the good news of our being saved by grace, not by our own merit through our good works.
Mm-hmm. So how could it harm them if they're trying to do good for them?
Well, let's take a concrete example out of fairly typical policy. Some folks will look at low wages that very young, early stage workers receive, perhaps in fast food restaurants and things like that. And they'll say, look, you know, this is a very low wage. How can this person thrive on that kind of a wage? This ought to be raised. And so now there are different ways that we could go about raising that wage. One way would be to provide more training for that person so that she's able to earn more. She's able to produce more, and therefore an employer can afford to pay her more and still keep the business running, right? Another way to do that is simply for the employee himself to just simply, go to school, learn more skills, spend more time around the job, learning from people who've been there for a long time. Another way to do that is to ask the government to determine a minimum amount that people in this sort of job must be paid per hour, and we'll call that a minimum wage. And when we go to that, the government doing it, one of the things that we have to remember is that government is, by definition, an entity of force. Every policy that government sets forth, it is prepared to enforce by the threat of fine, the threat of imprisonment, and if you resist that, even the threat of death ultimately. And so we really should be very, very sure that this is something we think is essential to real justice if we want the government to do this.
Okay. Now, I think a big aspect of the woke movement is social justice, right? So what role does social justice play in the woke movement exactly?
Yeah. Well, it helps to try to get a good handle on just what is meant by social justice. And even that, unfortunately, is kind of difficult. One doesn't find a lot of precise definitions of it. One of the definitions I saw at actually at a Canadian government website a number of years ago, and I'm trying to pull this from memory. I actually do quote it in the booklet on social justice versus biblical justice, was basically that social justice seeks to ensure some degree of equality of economic condition, of housing, of healthcare, of education, and so on, among all the people in a society.
Right.
So equality of outcome maybe is what we could term that. Another, some people will respond to that. Well, but since people have different likes and dislikes, they have different skills, they have different aptitudes, they have different backgrounds. A child who grows up in a home with parents who couldn't care less about reading and education just simply is very unlikely to have the same outcome as a child who grows up in a home with parents who really highly value education and reading.
Mm-hmm.
So equal outcomes really can't be achieved very well, but what we can do is go for equal opportunities. But even there, I just now illustrated how opportunities can be very unequal.
Right.
If you were born in the last couple of decades, you have all kinds of opportunities for high-tech healthcare that I didn't have, having been born 65 years ago, and so equality even of opportunity is something that we cannot necessarily achieve. And the attempt to achieve these equalities requires force. And it typically requires forcing some people to forgo or to forfeit what they could otherwise enjoy through their own efforts in order to provide something to other people who have not made those same efforts. So what we need to do is to come up with a solidly consistent definition of justice. And as a Christian theologian, I look to the Bible for my standard of what I would do with that. And my studies there, looking at all the uses of the different Hebrew and Greek terms that are translated just, justice, right, righteous, and so on, Uh, what I found in looking at how they're actually used in the Bible, I summarized the definition of justice this way. Justice means rendering impartially and proportionally to everyone his due in conformity with the righteous standard that is God's moral law. So the criteria there are four. Impartiality. We don't play favorites. There aren't some people to whom the laws don't apply, but they apply to the rest of us. And proportionality. You don't use the same reward for tremendously fine performance, producing an extremely valuable good, that you do for sloppy, lazy performance, producing a good that hardly anybody wants. Also, you don't punish, say, shoplifting the same way you punish murder, right?
Right.
So there's proportionality of what is due to what people actually perform, what their conduct is. So we look at merit, we look at what someone has earned, either positively or negatively. And the criteria for that we find in the moral law of God as summarized, for example, in the Ten Commandments. So if we understand justice that way, then we realize that since people do differ and differ gloriously, I mean, God help us if we didn't, but because people differ and differ gloriously in what we enjoy, what we're skilled at, what we're gifted at, and so on, the attempt to equalize everyone, or even to make them more equal than they otherwise would naturally be, is actually the opposite of justice, because it requires partiality, requires playing favorites, promoting some people, some groups over other groups, and it ignores proportionality, and it ignores what is due, what is actually deserved.
Okay, so you're kind of explaining how social justice compares with biblical justice as you understand it, right? Okay, now in your writings, you have also distinguished between positive rights, which you associate with social justice, right? And the negative rights, which you say are more consistent with biblical justice. So what's the difference between those?
Yeah, it's a very important difference, and unfortunately, of course, the term negative has a negative, a nasty connotation, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so that's kind of sad, but I distinguish the two this way, and this is a fairly conventional distinction among philosophers of ethics. Negative rights are rights against harm, so that my negative right to be alive, right, is not a right to have everybody else provide for me the air and the water and the food and the clothing and the shelter that I need, right? It is a right against having other people take my life away from me unjustly. And I can actually forfeit that right. If I'm in the midst of attacking somebody else, threatening to kill him, he has a right to use necessary force to prevent that, even to the point of killing me. So I've forfeited that negative right. But fundamentally, a negative right is a right against harm. My right to property is not a right for somebody to provide for me all the books that you see in my background. It is a right for me to expect that nobody who comes into my home is going to just grab some of those books and walk off and steal them. My right to health is not a right for other people to ensure that I get adequate nutrition and proper exercise and so on. It's a right not to have other people assault and batter me, poison me, and so on. So negative rights are rights against harm. Positive rights, supposedly, are rights to particular benefits. And the problem with positive rights is twofold. The first one is, if it's a right to something that other people are supposed to provide, how do we identify which other people? Can we say, that James down the street owes me a wardrobe? No, we really can't do that. And so the notion of who owes is unanswered in positive rights. But the other problem with positive rights is that in order to enforce them, we're going to wind up contradicting negative rights, violating negative rights. If I have a right to property, and if God has ordained the state, the civil government, to enforce justice, then if the state's going to provide property for me, well, it could provide it from my own earnings, in which case it's not made any difference, right? Or it can provide it from the earnings of others. But if it provides it from the earnings of others, then it is violating their negative right against harm, the taking of their property unjustly. Nothing gives me a right to somebody else's property.
Right.
And so positive rights are inherently self-contradictory, and for that matter, also would change drastically over time. For 10,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 200 years ago, I had a right not to have somebody punch me in the nose. You had a right, Jeanette, for nobody to steal your property, right? But 1,000 years ago, 150 years ago, who had a right to antibiotics? Nobody. We didn't have antibiotics. So do rights change over time? Is justice a malleable thing that changes over time? I don't think so. It's supposed to be a transcendent principle applicable to all people in all circumstances.
Such a huge, huge topic. Speaking of positive rights versus negative rights. But Dr. Cal Beisner, it looks like we're out of time, unfortunately. I know there's a lot to say, but we'll have to have you back on again. Dr. Cal
Thanks
Beisner,
very much.
yes, National Spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and author of Social Justice versus Biblical Justice. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeanette. God bless.
You too. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at BCN. Thanks for watching.